Hello everyone. Continuing on the series on how to apply filters to create different elements in After Effects, this video will cover how to create fairly realistic fire. This will be 2D fire as opposed to the 3D fire that we did in the other video. So let's get started. For this, I will be creating a new composition, and I'm going to use the same settings that we've been using throughout class. This composition I will call the final fire. So that's where my final fire is going to go. I'll make it 8 seconds, 30 FPS works just fine. Make sure the background is black so you can see what you're doing. And let's get going. So with this new composition, what I'm going to do is I am going to add into it a solid. This solid will be black. It really doesn't matter what color it is actually, because this is going to be covered by a fractal noise effect. So I'll just go ahead and click OK on this. And I will call this solid texture. That is the texture where I'm going to be putting the texture of the actual fire. So I'll click OK. And like I said a second ago, I will be adding fractal noise to that solid. Sorry about that. Now, for the settings for this fractal noise I'll be working with, I am going to be changing some things in here to make these look more like fire tongues so that they look like almost vertical strips. And for that, I will need to decrease my contrast and increase my brightness. Let's start with that. So you see that I get really sharp contrast. I mean sharp brightness, sorry. And then I will change the scaling of this from being uniform to just being about 200 to 250%, 250 pixels, sorry, on the height. So let's go with that. I will also use this offset turbulence to move those tongues of fire going upward. You'll notice that this, if I change these values, this changes the X and Y values of those tongues of fire. So if I move the X value, this will be moving left and right. And if I move the Y value, it'll be moving up or down. So I will use a piece of script that will allow me to move this upward at all times. And for that, I am going to press the Alt key or the Command key on the Mac, click on the stopwatch to open up the dialog box for the code down here on my timeline. I am going to open up the square bracket, and I'm going to put the number 0. That will be the value that I will be feeding into the X value. I don't want this to move left or right. I just want it to move up. So then I'm going to press comma, and then I'm going to enter time, which means what time is my time indicator pointing to at any given time. And then I'm going to multiply that times -500. So that means that for every second of my time, my y-axis value for that offset turbulence is going to move 500 pixels up. So if I close now my square bracket and put the semicolon to close the actual code, if I move my time marker to the 1 second mark, my value here should be -500, and it is. If I move it to 2 seconds, it should be -1000. So my code is moving that value, multiplying whatever the time happens to be on the time marker times -500. I'm going to use the same principle of time times a number to change the evolution values. So for that, I am going to press the Alt key or Command key on the Mac, click on the evolution, and I am going to type for that one, time times 50. And that means my evolution, the amount of change that's going to be inside the seeding of all these fractal elements, is going to be changing once 50 degrees every second. So if I go to the 1 second mark, you'll notice here that my evolution is 50 degrees. So that is working just fine. This is a bit complex right now. I want to make sure that I make these tongues of fire not look almost like webs, but almost like actual flames. So I want to reduce the complexity of this a bit. I want to make it like probably like 3. Yeah, that looks good. It's a little bit blurry, but we can bring that back out with another filter called Unsharp Mask. So we'll do that a little bit later. So this is fine, but this looks almost like a wall of fire, and I'm not getting any depth on the actual wall of fire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the fractal noise. You probably noticed at the bottom of the fractal noise that we have a blending mode. So that means that I can apply as many fractal noises to create that layering effect that fire has when you're looking at it at a distance. Some tongues of flame will go faster, higher, faster than others, and they look like almost like giving you that sensation of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that fractal noise. Let me collapse it and duplicate it. So now I have one fractal noise on top of the other. For this one, however, I will be changing some settings. I will be changing the contrast back to 100, and I'm going to change the brightness to 0. So I want to make it almost look like it's a ghostly wall of fire in front of the other one. I will maintain the transformation values to 250. That works just fine. I probably will not want to have the, let me think. I probably want to have my complexity even lower than that. So probably 1 would do. And like I said, I want this to be like a ghostly image in front of the other one. I want to change. I don't want to make this move. I just want these things to be changing in the background. So I don't want the offset turbulence to be activated. So to deactivate it on the new copy of the fractal filter, all I need to do is simply press the Alt key or the Command key on the Mac and click on that stopwatch. That resets that setting and removes the code from the timeline. You'll notice that the numbers went back to being blue. I do, however, want to maintain the evolution because the evolution makes the little black spots and white spots change place, which is what we had used in class to use displacement maps. And so I want that to be the ghostly image in the background. I also want to change the evolution options. And that means where are these black spots being generated from? Where is the fractal information being generated from? Because I made a copy of the original fractal noise, they match pretty much the ones in the background. So I need to make sure that they're offset a bit. So I want to change that random seeding to say about 1,000. And so that creates randomness. And so now my new fractal noise is different from the one below it, behind it, which is this one over here. And what I need to do now is change the blending mode on this fractal noise from normal to screen. Or soft light, actually. Let's do soft light. Soft light would probably work better because screen will make it too bright. Yeah. Let's make soft light. And if you notice when I scrub, I now get what looks like a wall of fire, but the background seems to be changing constantly. And that gives me that variation, that gives me that sensation of depth in the actual fire. Okay? So with that done, what I also want to do is I want to eliminate the sharpness of where this starts. So I want to make kind of like a white gradient at the bottom of the screen. To do that, there are many ways of doing this. We could do a white solid and put it in the background, and in front of it, and then create a mask and feather it. But I want to show you another way of doing it that is going to save you some time and some rendering time as well, because everything will be within one single layer. And that is to add a fill color to this particular layer. Now, when I add a fill color to the layer, what's going to happen is it's going to turn red because that's the default color for fill. So I want to make that white. Click OK. And then what I want to do is I want to create a mask for that layer. So I'll select the layer, click on my rectangle tool to call the masking, and I'm going to create a mask that covers only the bottom half of the layer. Now you'll notice that I went a bit past the sides and below significantly. And that is because what I want to do is I want to mask this layer and I want to feather it substantially. So I want to go ahead and call the feathering value for that mask by pressing the F key on the keyboard. And I'm going to make it about 200 pixels, let's say. Probably even more, probably 300 pixels. And then I'll bring this down to almost the bottom so that half point of that mask is almost at the bottom of it doesn't have to be exact, but something like this, so that it looks like there's a gradient that is fading into the background. Now, the thing with this mask that I just created is that any filter that can use masks for compositing within a layer will be available within the layer itself. And what that means is the following. Let me stretch this out. And I'm going to press, by selecting that layer, I'm going to press the E key on the layer. That calls all of the effects that have been applied. Now, I am going to uncollapse the fill. And you'll notice that at the bottom of the fill, I have compositing options that are not available under the effects controls. That's because this affects the actual layer directly. It doesn't belong in the effect controls. It belongs inside the layer. And what this allows me to do is add compositing that is related to this filter, specifically to any masks that I have within that layer. So if I click on the plus button, I will get a listing of all the masks that I have attached to that layer, in this case only one mask, and the filter will only affect whatever is covered by that specific mask. So let me deselect so you can see the final result. Basically, it's a gradient that goes from white to transparent, and I still see the other fractal noises above it. So that becomes my texture. That is the texture that I want to use for my flames. Now, the second portion of this is to actually create the flame shape. And so for that, I'm going to create another solid. This solid I'm going to call flame shape, just for lack of more creative names. And in this layer, I should make this solid white. So I'm going to select the layer, and I'm going to go to solid settings, and I'm going to make it white. The reason for that you'll see is because I'm going to use this as a Luma matte in a few minutes. So I'll go ahead and make it white, and then I'm going to use my pen tool with the flame shape layer selected. I am going to click up here, then I'm going to click roughly down here, and I'm going to Bezier that curve a little bit, and then I'm going to click up here to close it. That is the shape of my candle, or the shape of my flame. I am going to feather that about 80 pixels. Let's see. Let me turn the texture layer off for just a second to see. My goal is to get softness at the top, just like you see here with the feathering, a fairly sharp white area in the center. So that's going to be my Luma matte. But I want my fire to be fairly sharp at the bottom. And I mean, I don't want this much glow underneath it. If we look, for example, at images online for torch lights, which is what we're trying to create in this exercise, you'll notice that basically the fire, it's pretty well cut at the bottom. But as it grows and all the flames sort of converge into one another, you see that intense glow. And that's what we want it from the middle up. As it fades out, then it becomes a little bit darker. So that is our intent. And if I look at my mask right now, I have a pretty feathered look, because that's an even feather all around the entire mask. I could even duplicate that mask to try to get more intensity in the center and feather out a little bit more that second value, let's say to, I don't know, 125. And so I get some feathering, and I get a pretty sharp white center area where I'm going to be using the Luma matte, but that it actually increased the amount of glow that I have around here. So I want to eliminate that glow. To do that, I will use a curves filter. And this is probably the first time you use curves to do what I'm about to do. Besides colors, let me apply curves to that. Besides the color channels that you have inside the curves filter that you have used in Photoshop, you also have an alpha channel. And that alpha channel will start reducing the amount of visibility based on whatever values you give it. So let me switch to alpha and bring that curve slightly down, and you'll notice that I am sort of compressing the feathering in the layer. Now it's feathering everything, which is opposite what I wanted. I wanted to maintain the feather at the top and reduce it at the bottom. So to achieve this exercise, what I'm going to do is the same thing that I did a few steps ago with the fill color under the texture. And that is, I am going to create a mask at the bottom. So I'll select the flame shape layer. I'm going to select the masking tool, and I'm going to create a mask at the bottom. I am going to feather that mask. I'm going to make it probably, let's see, about 200 pixels. Yeah, that's good. And then now I need to associate that curves filter with that mask, which is mask 3. By the way, you can always select your masks and hit the return key or enter key on the keyboard and rename them. So if I want to rename that mask bottom mask, then that would help me select the mask appropriately when I go back. So let's go ahead and select the layer again. Press the E key to call the curves filter in there. Go to the composite and options and choose from the list bottom mask. And now you'll notice that my layer is feather at the top and starts getting sharp at the bottom. How sharp depends on a couple of things. Let me select the layer again, press the F key on the keyboard to call its feathering. If I reduce the feathering completely, I get no feathering. So I can go ahead and start playing around until I find a happy medium. I can also change the settings on the curve in my curves window until I get a combination of settings that I am happy with. And I am happy with something like this. So let's go with an even number 180, and my curve is just okay. So that with that setup, I now have the sharpness at the bottom. The flame as it grows is going to get feathery, and then I want it to disappear at the top. So to do so, sorry, what I want to do is I want to create a fractal noise that affects this layer. So I know it sounds weird, but let's go with that for just a second. Let me apply a fractal noise. And this is going to be actually a really strange fractal noise for most of you. I'm going to apply the fractal noise to the layer. And you'll notice that my fractal noise basically affects the entire thing. So it's almost like I'm not seeing any of the white. And then what I want to do with that fractal noise, this case, is I want to increase the contrast substantially. I want to make it like 225 or 250, something really, so that I see really sharp whites and really dark blacks. So something like that. Then I want to change the uniform scale of this under transform. Make sure that my uniform scaling is on, and I want to make it like 150 to make it larger. And you probably see where I'm going with this. I am trying to create this texture that's going to be moving, that is going to be compensating for the feathery flames that we created with the texture. That's what I'm trying to do. So with that done, what I want to do now is I want to change the turbulence. Again, I want to move the y-axis, so I'm going to use the same formula that I was using before. Press the Alt key or the Command key, click on the stopwatch, and then I am going to type open bracket, the square bracket, 0 for the x, and then comma, and then time times -400. Now I know that we close the bracket and semicolon. I know that we use 500 for the previous one. And if you think about it, the more variance that you have within those values and the things that are moving upward in the flame, the more layering you're going to get in the final effect of the flame. The more it's going to look like you have layers of flames going up, even though this is 2D fire. So with that done, let's scrub and see what that does. It's actually working pretty well. Let's change I think that I get a little bit too much of a web feel there. So let's change the complexity a little bit. Let's make it a little bit softer. So 4 will do, or 5. Might have to come back and revisit this. And then what I want to do is I want to change the blending mode on this to multiply. And I want to apply that only to the upper half of the flame, to this part where the flame actually falls outward, like so. If you look at this, that's where the flames tend to go out like that, and they start sort of fuging out. They disappear after that area. They sort of start flaming out. So my goal is to achieve that. So to do so, let me go back, and I want to just narrow this to the top portion of the layer. And as you probably figured out, now we know how to focus the fractal noise only to the top portion of that layer. And that is to create a mask. So let's select that flame shape, create another mask up here at the top. Let me zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to make it just the top portion of the layer. I probably want to feather this. Let's make it actually a significant feather for this one. Let's make that one about 400. Yeah, that goes all the way and starts fading towards the bottom where the flame will be sharp. And what I want now is I want to associate that filter with that layer. So let's go to the layer again, press the E key on the keyboard to call the effects, open up the fractal noise, and at the bottom, composite and options. Click on the plus, and then look for the layer that you want, which is in my case is mask 3. I didn't rename it. I should have renamed it, but I didn't. So mask 3 is the one that's at the top now, and it's only masking that. It's only allowing me to see that fractal noise at the top. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but remember, this is going to be the track matte, the track matte for my texture. That's all that I'm creating is based on that. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So now I'm going to switch on my texture at the bottom. I will now choose that track matte for this as Luma Matte, and you should see a combination of my track map from this, my all the curves and all the stuff that I applied to this, affecting the layer that happens to be below below it, the texture. So I'm only using that information for that. Now with this done, what I want to achieve now is I want to make this move around as a flame would. So if you look at these images, the flame sort of moves sideways. It starts moving, sort of getting displaced, as you can see. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a displacement map. So on top of these two layers, I will create a solid layer. Let's create a solid layer. Make it white, and I'm gonna call this layer a displacement map. And I am going to apply a fractal noise. So we're doing fractal noise today. That's what this is. And so with this fractal noise, what I want to do is I want to change the type from basic to dynamic. So we get this bulbous, almost like magma looking thing, and that's what we want. I also want to increase its size. So let's scale it up a bit, about 150, 175 probably. Yeah, that's good. 175, so that we don't get too much detail. That I don't want to get all of these little curves, because then my fire is going to look like it's exploding in all directions. It's almost going to look like tiny mini flames. Let's see, what else do I want? I want to change the position of it through offset turbulence. So the same trick as before. I'm going to click on that stopwatch, and I'm going to open square bracket, 0, comma, times negative. This time I'm going to change it upwards, negative 600. So we use 400, 500, and 600. And let's see, that's moving upwards. That's good. I also want to change the complexity of this guy. Let's see, do I want to, let me keep it at 6 for now. I want to change the evolution. So I want that to be moving, and I want this to be times 250, let's say, or 300. I just want it to move quite substantially. So it's a lot of degree rotation in the evolution value. Okay, and so that's looking a little bit like melting lava, and that's exactly what I want. That's the kind of texture that I want to control my displacement map. And let's go to to make sure that it's completely different than all the other fractal origins. I am going to change the random seed to about 3000 under the evolution options. And let's go with that for now. Let's go ahead and keep this as is for now. So that's going to be my displacement map. I am going to add an adjustment layer to this stack. That's going to go between the two flames and that displacement map. And it is in that adjustment layer that I will be applying the displacement map filter. So let me right click on the composition, go new, adjustment layer, and I'm going to rename that adjustment layer map. And inside that map layer, I will be applying the displacement map filter. So there's displacement map, and I'll apply it to the map layer. Now let me turn off the map layer, and I'm going to switch my displacement map layer to the displacement map, and I'm going to be using luminance. Now you see that even if I change this, not much is changing. The entire thing is moving. And the reason for that is because this displacement map, remember, as far as this composition is concerned, that displacement map layer is a white layer. It's not seeing the black and white information. So I need to pre-compose that. So I'll select that layer so that I can get all that black and white information, that gradient information, all those grays inside a composition. And that way, when the displacement map filter looks at it, it sees the actual gradations. So let's go ahead and call this displacement map comp. And let's click OK. Now that it has been pre-composed, let me go back and turn it off, and you'll see that once I apply changes to my displacement map here, I should see a significant amount of change in my fire. As you can see, it almost looks like there's a flame that's going up, but it's going all over the place. And part of the reason for this is because, as we did before with the texture, when we first started looking at that texture, we had to create a solid area where there's no disturbance from the fractals at the bottom. And to do that, we did a fill. So we're going to go into our displacement map, which is what is generating that deformation. All this deformation is being generated by the displacement map using that black and white information. And I'm going to apply a filter to this layer here. I'm going to apply a fill. And the fill will be using, in this case, instead of red, is going to be using a gray, which is sort of the median color of what you see in the actual fractal noise. So I'm aiming to get a color that is somewhere like the median color from that. And let me turn that back on, and I am going to apply a mask to this layer, half bottom, just like the other ones, pretty large. And I am going to apply a feathering to this mask, just like I've been doing on the others. I think we used like 350 for the previous one, I believe. That looks good. Let me just bring that down a little bit and bring the mask up. Yeah, that looks good. And then I will composite that filter, the fill filter, to the mask that I just created. So let me go into that layer, press the E key on the keyboard to call the fill, compositing options, click on the plus, and since that's the only mask that I have, that does the trick. So now you'll notice that the bottom of this is grayed out and it fades into the fractal noise. When I go back to my final fire, I get a solid color here. I don't get as much disturbance. The further I want that to go, the more I need to move that mask. So let me select the layer here in the displacement map. We'll click it and perhaps increase it a little bit, like so. And now my flame tends to be a little bit more solid at the bottom, which is what I want. I eventually want to get that. That's what my intent is, to get it as solid as possible, all the way to halfway up the flame, which is this. And so now you see that it looks like the fire is coming from a torch and it's falling, it's breaking apart as it goes up, which is what you see in most torch cases. You have a solid area where it comes from, and then the fire breaks into different flames, into different tongues in all directions as it gets up into the air. So that is the goal for what we're doing here. Now let's take a look at this and see how we can improve. Perhaps we can reduce the amount of fractal under the fractal noise here. But before we go back and start changing those settings, let's go ahead and pre-compose this 4 layers. I'm going to pre-compose it, and I'm going to call this the fire. I'm just going to call it fire comp. And I'll click OK. Now that fire comp is the fire comp that I'm going to be using to set the actual fire. I am going to make a copy of that fire comp, and I'm going to rename that subsurface fire. And that's going to be a fire that's going to be sort of laying behind the fire. The only difference between that composition and the final fire, in the fire comp, it's going to be that on the subsurface fire, I'm going to double click it to open it. I am going to change a couple of the settings. I am going to probably change the amount of the adjustment, the amount of displacement. So let's make that 100. So that is a little bit more straight. And I probably would change also some of the settings in the second on the fractal noise inside the actual flame up here. I probably would change my transformation. I'd probably make it like 200, so it's slightly different. And so now it looks like I have a wider kind of flame. If you want to get more detail, you can actually change the shape of the actual flames, the actual masks. So I could go in and actually change my original mask here and increase the width just to get a little bit more of a wider flame. So not major changes, not in terms of the actual filters. I just simply wanted to get a wider reach of the flames. And let me go back to my final fire composition, and I'm going to bring that subsurface fire underneath my other fire. You'll notice that it got brighter because they match pretty well. But what I want is for this top fire comp to be in multiply mode. And that starts bringing back those tongues of fire, that differential between the front and the back. And so that starts creating more like what it looks like fire back there, as you can see. Now, with this setup, what I want to do now is I want to start colorizing this. So the first thing I want to do to colorize this is I want to create an adjustment layer. So let me go ahead and create an adjustment layer here. And I want to apply filters to that adjustment layer. I'm gonna call that adjustment layer the color layer, color glow, because that's where it's gonna go. And in this color layer, I'm going to apply, I want to bring back some of those sharp masks, some of the sharpening masks over here. By the way, so that you know, I forgot to mention at the very beginning, my composition is 32-bit, so that I can take advantage of all the colors and all the variation in the gradients to make it look really nice. So change your composition to 32-bit before you do that. It will work on 8-bit as well, but you might get some kind of staircasing in the transition between the different gradients. So what I want to do now is I want to apply a filter to this called Unsharpen Mask. There it is, Unsharp Mask, and I'm going to apply it to the to my adjustment layer. And I want to change the settings on this to, let's say, 80 on the amount, and that starts bringing some of that black, and that's what I want. I want to create some of that information. I want to make sure that I get some nice tongues of fire. All right, so that, let me change the radius to about 10. Yeah, that brings that back. It removes all the staircasing that you saw a second ago. So let me make that a bit sharper, 90. And I start seeing some of the tongues of fire showing up. Look really nice. Now what I want to do at this point is I want to also change my brightness and contrast on this. So I wanna bring the brights to be bright and the darks to be dark. So I will go ahead and apply a brightness and contrast to this, and the settings for that probably start with like -50. So that brings down the brightness, but it maintains those things that are really bright. And I want to increase the contrast to actually accentuate that. So let me go to about 50 on contrast. So now that I have this set up, let me browse through it really quick, scrub through it, change the rendering quality to half so that it renders a little bit faster. I am seeing the flame. I'm seeing what I need to get out of this. So with that done, what I want to do is I want to colorize this. So let's go ahead and use the same trick that we used in class to colorize the other flame, the 3D flame. And I'm going to use a curves filter for this. So I'll apply a curves filter. And for this filter, I will be using presets that I know from experience that work well. So my presets are as follows. For the RGB or gamma channel, I will be bringing this down slightly on this sector, and I'll be bringing it up on this sector, almost creating kind of like a wave. Then I will switch to the red, and the reds go high. So you see that I'm bringing those red colors up. And this is very telling. The fact that I'm simply changing a black and white image channels and automatically I'm getting coloration, that tells me that there's some color information there that I need to be paying attention to. So there's the red. Let me bring the green, and the green follows the gamma channel almost. So something like this. And then let me bring down the blue. And that gives me the actual coloration that I'm looking for in the flame. However, as you can see, I'm only seeing the coloration at specific spots. And that's why I said a second ago that the fact that I'm seeing colors is very telling, even though everything we've been working with is black and white. So far, the program still sees color somewhere in there, and it's enhancing those colors to create the actual colors that you're seeing. What that tells me is that I need to reduce any coloration that I have in this file to black. And what that means is it's almost like when you apply a filter or you place a color layer on top of another and change that layer's mode to just affect the color channel. And that basically, like, say I have a black and white image and I put a green image in front, a green solid in front of it, and I change the solid settings to be color, then my black and white image is going to be black and green. That's exactly what I want to do right now. So let me add a new adjustment layer, and I want to add a solid composite to this. Solid composite effect, which basically all it does is it creates a fake or a solid with whatever color I apply to that solid, and it will change the colors of whatever happens to be underneath it to match that solid composite colors. So let's go to the filters window, and I'm going to choose solid composite, and I'm going to apply it. By default, it is white. Once I change that to black, that means bring all the values down, then I'll get the colors that I need to get for my fire. Without the solid composite, with the solid composite. And as you can see, let me zoom out a little bit. Let me go ahead and do a quick preview for this. And I get fairly realistic flames. Now, if I want to make it look like a torch, you'll notice that torches have this bluish purplish hue in the center, and usually torches are dark because that's where the fire is born. Fire only gets really to glow when it hits full oxygen, which is somewhere as it goes midway in the life of the actual flame. So I want to reduce that center point, and to do so, I'm probably going to create me a black solid. So actually, I'll do a solid. Yeah, I'm not going to do a mask. I'm going to do a solid. So I'm going to create a black solid, and I'm going to call that spot, for lack of a better word, or center. And then I'm going to make that kind of like a deep blue, something like this, or purplish. Okay. And then I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK on that. And then I'm going to bring that right below the solid composite. Actually, I'm going to bring it right on top of the solid composite. And let's go ahead and create us a mask. Let me turn that visibility off on that solid, and then I'm going to make a mask for it right here. At this point, I'm going to apply some feathering to that mask. So let's see, let's increase it. Let's turn it on right now again to see what it's doing. So I'm going to make it about 75, and then I'm going to change the opacity of that to about 50%. And that becomes the center point for the flame, where the flame is being born. So you might want to deform that. It's too perfectly round right now. We might want to make it a little bit more like so. And you can go ahead and play with the shape of it to see what you get. And you'll notice that because my transparency on that is 50%, you see some of the flames that apparently are going behind it look like they're going in front of it, so that the flames are almost like turning around the actual center of the fire. So let's play that back really quick. Now, if you're getting really, really weird color, like really sharp orangey colors, you can always go back and start revising the values on the curves to start getting either more fairly photorealistic fire, or, you know, changing those values will automatically change the settings on the overall look of the fire. And so that is how you create photorealistic fire. Now, if you want to affect the way the tongues of fire look, like right now they look like it's a fairly large fire, that's why you see all this twisting, then you know that all you need to do is go back and revisit things like the displacement map options. So for example, this displacement map is fully controlling how this fire looks up here. So what I want to do, maybe I want to feather that out a little bit. Let's apply some feathering to this layer overall. So I am going to, on top of all those filters, I am going to apply a fast blur. Whoops, fast blur. And there it is. I'll apply it on top of everything, and then I'm going to increase that to, let's say, 4. Now you'll notice how this got blurry here. Take a look at the effect it had on the actual fire here, and take a look at the final fire. So that gets a little bit blurrier. If I want to make it before the fill, and perhaps increase that blur radius to 6, let's see what effect that has on my final fire. So as you can see now, if I want to change more details, I can keep on digging down. I can go to the subsurface fire, not the subsurface fire, the final fire. Inside that inside the fire comp composition, I might want to change the fractal noise at the top. So instead of having so much, having this be so big, maybe I want to change the transformation values to 200, let's say, and that makes it bigger. And let's see what effect that has on my fire. So, I mean, you can see that these things start changing the shape, changing those the filters that you've applied, the displacement maps, and the fractal noise textures that you've created will affect the final fire. So you can go back and revisit until you get basically a fire that is what you're looking for. Something like this. You'll notice that the flames are a little bit more solid as opposed to the original flames. Let me undo what I've done several times so that you can see the difference. You see how this was originally very, very fractalized, so to speak. And if I go to the way I had it afterwards, the way I did what I did, let's go all the way to the fire comp. Let's start with that one, for example. Go to the fractal noise. Change the fractal noise value from transformation to, let's say, 50. Or let's make it even higher. Instead of 150, let's make it 200. And see what effect that has. Go back here and see what effect that has on your fire. Let's go to the displacement map, the original displacement map, and increase the fast blur radius to about 5 and see what that does to my final fire. As you can see, it changes basically the perception of the actual fire. So I hope this shows you how to create 2D realistic fire.